I want to bring in Christopher Hill. He's a former ambassador and assistant secretary of state. He was also the lead U.S. delegate during the six-party talks with North Korea from 2005 to 2009. Mr. Ambassador, thanks so much. As we said, CNN has not verified this. How trustworthy is information coming from South Korea when it comes to this sort of thing?
Well, it varies, but I think with respect to this, I give it a greater probability of being true than some of the other stuff that comes out. I mean, Chung Sung-taek has not been seen now for a couple of months, maybe more, when it comes to actually standing next to Kim Jong-un. And he's a bit of an irascible fellow and has had his problems in the past, so this wouldn't be the first time that he's been purged.
Why do you think that Kim Jong-un would remove his uncle? And unfortunately, as with so much about North Korea, we have to theorize and speculate because we don't know much about what's going on there. But as somebody who has experience in the region, why would that happen? Is it about separating himself from his father's reign, perhaps?
Yeah, I think that could be part of it, but it's clear that at the beginning of the Kim Jong-un rule, where he had Chung Sung-taek at his side the whole time, it sort of opened up a question whether Kim Jong-un was really in charge. And one thing we know about this boy king is that he very much wants to show he's in charge. So it could be that he simply had a falling out with Chung Sung-taek, as his father did at various times. And he is also always at pains to show he's a different kind of guy from his father. And he's also the kind of guy who makes these kind of impetuous decisions. And certainly last spring, when he was threatening war on the rest of the planet, you didn't see much of Chung Sung-taek involved in that. So I suspect that there's some substantive disagreements, and he really wants to show North Koreans especially that he's in charge.
Well, that's interesting. If Chung Sung-taek, the uncle, was not visible during that very heated period in the spring when Kim Jong-un was threatening the world, what are we to make of what role Chung Sung-taek, the uncle, who is believed to have been purged, plays? Is he in any way, I hesitate to even use the term, but is he a moderating force at all?
Yeah, good for you to hesitate to use that term, because I was about to say the same thing.
Right.
I mean, there are indications that he was sort of more aware of market forces in economics than maybe Kim Jong-un was. There are certainly, has always been the view that Chung Sung-taek, erred on the side of being more moderate than the rest of the leadership. But that said, he's obviously a pretty hard-nosed guy who's been very much a part of that miserable leadership for many, many years. So, it is hard to say if he is leaving the scene, what that really means. But I have the feeling it doesn't mean anything good, and could in fact mean that Kim Jong-un is very much on his own, along with some of these new military people that he has appointed himself.
And of course, Mr. Ambassador, we can't have a conversation about North Korea without talking about the two Americans being held prisoner, Merrill Newman and Kenneth Bae. Can you walk us through the difficulties of getting Americans released in countries such as North Korea, Cuba, Iran?
It's a very painstaking process, and I think rule number one is not to talk about it too much in public, except to state the obvious, that they ought to be released immediately. But I am sure, I have no doubt that the U.S. government is doing what it can to get these people released. But the more they talk about it publicly, probably the more difficult it is. I recall very well the Iranian situation where we had these 3 hikers who were caught for no apparent reason. And what these issues often descend to is the internal politics of the country in which they're being held captive. And so the more we say publicly, the more that can be used by whichever side. So I think it's important to work quietly behind the scenes, and I suspect we're doing that. And I do hope the Chinese are stepping up in this regard.
Ambassador Christopher Hill, thank you so much.